If you're tired of the same old thrift flips, then you're going to love today's video. I'll be sharing 7 DIY projects using only items from Goodwill and one unexpected item that my father-in-law rescued from the trash. And these are not your typical thrift flips. I'll be transforming my finds in unique and surprising ways that I hope will leave you feeling inspired. So let's get started.
You know, I love clocks, so I'm going to start with this fabulous wall clock that I thrifted for less than $7. First, I want to try to remove the design from the glass door. By rubbing my hand over it, I can feel that it's applied to the back side. So I pour a little goof off on the glass, which softens up the paint, and then I use a razor blade scraper to scratch it off. Only the gold design scraped off. The other pattern had actually been etched into the glass. To remove the clock face, I removed the small screws, popped off the clock hands, and then unscrewed the nut underneath the hands. Be sure to keep the clock parts organized if you plan on reassembling it later. Then I flipped the clock over and removed the battery mechanism from the back side. This one had a couple of wires that I had to pull off that were attached to a chime. The wood on the clock was very yellow and covered with a thick coat of polyurethane, so I decided to paint it. First, I cleaned it really well with liquid sandpaper, and then, because the surface was so shiny, I chose to use Rust-Oleum's chalk paint in Tate Green. It took 3 coats to get full coverage, so I needed to lightly sand the entire piece to give it a smooth finish. I decided to paint the area where the clock had been with Waverly's black chalk paint, which went on much smoother than the Rust-Oleum chalk paint. Originally, I was going to print out a snowy scene to decoupage to the lower half of the cabinet, but then I remembered I still had some Currier & Ives calendar prints that I had thrifted a few months ago. I cut one of those prints to fit the width of the clock and adhered it with a good coat of glue stick. The print was not quite tall enough, so I spliced together 2 pieces cut from another calendar print and adhered them along the bottom 2 inches of the cabinet. Once I add some additional decorations along the shelf bottom, you won't be able to tell that it isn't one continuous picture. But first, I needed to scrape off the paint that had gotten on the glass door. This is so much easier and faster than taping it off. Then I applied black wax over the green chalk paint. The paint was so dry that it really soaked up the wax, making it several shades darker. I had recently thrifted a box of miniature trees for just $3, and I wanted to use some of those trees inside the cabinet. To make the shorter trees a little taller, I hot glued a small wood block to the plastic tree base and then hot glued the block to the cabinet. I did the same thing with a small snowman that came in a thrift store bag full of Christmas ornaments, and I hot glued a deer to the plastic trees. I also popped the red bird off the snowman's hand so I could glue it to a tree branch where it would be more noticeable. To cover the wood blocks and plastic bases, I hot glued fluffy moss to the bottom shelf. Alternately, you could glue a large piece of styrofoam to the shelf to raise everything up an inch or 2. To give the moss a wintry look, I sprayed on adhesive and then sprinkled it with fake snow. For the clock, I superimposed a stanza from a Robert Frost poem onto an image of a vintage clock face. I did this in the Canva app. Then I sized and printed it out in the Print to Size app. I cut it out and attached it to the original clock face with spray adhesive. I could have reattached the clock mechanism, and I'm not sure why I didn't. Instead, I just hot glued the clock hands to the clock face so that it would read a few minutes before midnight. After screwing the clock face in place, I painted over the screws with some black chalk paint to make them disappear.
If you're a subscriber to my channel, you might remember me talking about Magic Mind a few months ago. And I wanted to mention them again because right now they are offering my viewers a chance to try their product for free. Magic Mind is a mental performance shot. I like to drink it straight out of the bottle first thing in the morning before I start working on my crafts and DIY projects.
Magic Mind contains real natural ingredients, and I find it increases my energy, motivation, and focus throughout the day without that jittery feeling that I get from so-called energy drinks.
I genuinely love this stuff, and I think you will too. So if you want to give it a try, just use the link in my description box and the code COTTAGETRIAL, and you'll get 3 free shots when you subscribe. And if you don't absolutely love it as much as I do, you can cancel your subscription at any time.
So my father-in-law gave me this glass lamp that he found next to the trash dumpster in his condominium complex. I truly didn't know what I was going to do with it, so I just began taking it apart and hoping I would get an idea. Most lamps have a nut at the bottom that holds all the pieces together. I loosened it, then I loosened the socket screws and removed the wires wrapped around them. Then I could pull out the cord and disassemble all the pieces. I was most interested in trying to repurpose the ornate metal pieces. I tried a couple of different things and discovered that an old pickle jar fit perfectly on the metal base. You could put a variety of things in the jar. I think a terrarium would look fabulous, but I decided to create something simple for Christmas. I just poured some faux snow into the jar and then added a few fake pine stems and a couple of real sticks from my yard. I also added a small bird's nest, a few pine cones, and a few fake berries. And for a finishing touch, I clipped a cardinal to one of the sticks. Then I sprinkled in a little more fake snow. I placed the remaining ornate metal piece on top of the jar for a lid, and to cover the hole, I used some Gorilla Glue to attach a glass cabinet knob from my stash. I often pick up wood salad bowls at the thrift store because they can be used for so many things. I wanted to make the wood darker on this bowl, so first I thoroughly sanded the sides and top edge so they would absorb the stain. I decided to use antiquing wax because it's easy to use and it doesn't have the odor that most stains have. I just brushed it on and wiped off the excess with a rag. For the other half of this project, I'm going to use the large glass globe from the lamp. If you thought the floral design was pretty, I need to apologize right now because I'm going to paint over it. I mixed some off-white chalk paint with a small scoop of salt wash, but you could also use baking soda or plaster of Paris. You just want to create a thick paint that will stick to the glass and create a textured pottery-like finish. I gave the globe 2 coats of the textured paint and then very lightly sanded it. I didn't get it on camera, but I took the globe outside and sprayed it with a clear top coat to protect the paint from scratching. Then I sat the globe in the salad bowl. You may want to glue or caulk around the top edge of the bowl to secure the 2 pieces together. To create a more unified look, I hot glued both the top and bottom edges of some Dollar Tree burlap trim over the seam. I don't think anyone will guess that this vase started as a lamp from the trash dumpster. Imagine how surprised I was to see this old shoe shine box at the thrift store. It even had several cans of shoe polish still inside. At first, I was hoping to keep the chippy white paint, but the wicker was badly stained, and even after I scrubbed it with a brush and Dawn dish soap, it still looked dirty. So I decided to give it a fresh coat of green spray paint. Once I brought it inside, I decided to dress up the front side of the wicker with a floral rub-on transfer. I chose one from IOD's Lover of Flowers package. Despite the texture of the wicker, it adhered perfectly. In fact, it almost looked too perfect. So I rubbed a paintbrush over it to push the design into the weave so it would look like it had been painted on. I decided not to reattach the lid, so I filled the screw holes with some wood putty, sanded the spots smooth, and painted over them. Now, let's do something more surprising. Let's repurpose the lid from the shoe shine box. It had an interesting design that I think might just be some kind of vintage contact paper. I removed the hinges and gave it a good cleaning. I was thinking the metal shoe rest would be perfect for holding floral stems. So I cut up a previously thrifted floral pick to use. Even though the stems fit firmly in the spaces, I used a little florist wire just to make sure that they stayed put. I pulled a bird from my stash that had wires attached to its feet. Since I think I'll hang this vertically, I attached the bird at the top of the shoe using those wires. Then, to disguise the wire, I hot glued a little Spanish moss underneath the bird. I am loving velvet right now, so I added a stem of velvet pumpkins from Dollar General and tied a velvet ribbon at the bottom of the shoe. Then I just needed to add a hook to the back to hang it. Metal wall art like this is readily available at my thrift stores. In fact, I saw this one on the shelf at Goodwill for a few weeks before I eventually bought it. I thought I could use it as a frame and put something in the center recessed cavity. To start, I gave it a couple coats of white chalk paint, and once the paint was dry, I cut up a stem of Dollar Tree plastic berries. The leaves were really flimsy, so I removed them. I began attaching the fruit stems in the center using caulk. For the purposes of this project, I thought plastic leaves would work better than fabric ones. So I found some stems with plastic leaves in my stash and attached those using caulk too. Once I was happy with the arrangement of the berries and the plastic leaves, I let the caulk dry for about 30 minutes. Then I used the same chalk paint and salt wash mixture that I had used on the glass globe to paint over the berries and leaves. I let this dry for a couple hours. Then I added more caulk around and between the berries and leaves. I used my fingers and a small paintbrush to get into gaps and to smooth it out. Since there were some pretty big globs of caulk, this time I let it dry overnight. I decided to distress the outer metal portion with some sandpaper to bring out some of that original metal color. Finally, I gave the leaves and berries another coat of paint. You could use regular chalk paint or use the textured paint again if you want more coverage. You might want to spray the piece with a clear top coat to seal and protect the paint too. When I first saw these bookends at Goodwill, they were asking $10 or $12, but a couple weeks later, they had a new price tag of $5.60. So that's when I bought them. I just wanted to use them as a base to create new bookends using an idea sent to me by a very thoughtful viewer. I used a hammer to knock off the football picture frames and then pulled out the nails that had held them in place. Then I used a little caulk to fill in the nail holes. These bookends are vinyl, not leather, so they should accept paint just fine. First, I applied a coat of Zinsser primer, and once the primer was dry, I gave the bookends 2 coats of black spray paint. I also thrifted a red birdcage candle stand and a ceramic cat that hangs from the side of a plant pot. I didn't want the birdcage to look like a candle stand, so I ripped out the candle cup in the base, which actually ended up taking out a few metal bars with it, but that's all right. For the best adhesion on the ceramic cat, I sprayed it with the same Zinsser primer I had used on the bookends. Then, when the primer was dry, I gave both the birdcage and the cat a couple coats of gold metallic spray paint, making sure to spray them from all sides and angles to get full coverage. Once the spray paint was dry on everything, I brought them inside and used E6000 adhesive to attach the cat to one of the bookends. To create a bird perch inside the cage, I pulled a wire picture stand from my stash and stretched it out using a pair of pliers. I cut off some of the wire and reshaped the bottom portion into a triangle. Then I used the extra piece of wire to create a loop to hang from the roof of the bird cage. For a bird, I used a thrifted Christmas ornament and just hot glued the sticks on the bird's underside to the bottom of the wire triangle. Then I hung it from the loop of wire inside the cage. To hold the cage in place, I found some metal braces in my stash that I had once taken off something. I drilled holes in the bookends and attached screws through the braces on the inside of the cage so that the braces extended over the bottom wires of the cage. This was enough to hold it firmly in place, so I didn't need to add screws through the outer brace holes. Then, for a cleaner look, I painted the screw heads gold. Unfortunately, you could still see the indentation where the football frames had been, so at the last minute I spray painted a ceramic bird from my stash and used some more E6000 to glue the bird over the indentation. I liked that it helped to fill up the empty space behind the cat. I hope you enjoyed today's thrift flips, and I'd love to know which one was your favorite. And if you enjoy projects like these, here's another video I think you'll like.